The sick daughter coughed blood into her father's trembling hands the same morning her mother threw their suitcases onto the rain-soaked street. But Jessica Morrison had no idea that her overweight, exhausted husband, Daniel, had just signed inheritance papers making him the sole heir to a $50 billion empire built by the uncle who'd vanished from his life 30 years ago. Daniel Morrison, the man she'd called worthless for a decade, the poor husband she'd mocked in front of their 7-year-old daughter Emma, the father who worked 3 jobs to pay for Emma's leukemia treatments, stood silent as his boss, Richard Blackwood, the man Jessica was leaving him for, spat directly in his face on their front porch while Jessica laughed with a cruelty that would haunt her forever. She kicked them out without hesitation. Her poor husband clutching their sick daughter to marry his boss and live the wealthy life she'd always craved. But what would Daniel do when the inheritance papers in his pocket revealed the shocking truth? Would he forgive the woman who stole their joint account, divorced him while Emma lay dying, and had the audacity to invite him to her wedding with Richard? Or would what he did at that wedding shock Jessica so completely that she'd realize she'd destroyed the one man who'd become more powerful than she could ever imagine? Daniel Morrison's hands shook as he signed the discharge papers at County General Hospital. His daughter Emma asleep in the wheelchair beside him, her pale face almost translucent under the fluorescent lights. The clock on the wall read 6:47 a.m. He'd been awake for 36 hours straight, working his morning shift at the warehouse, his afternoon shift driving for a rideshare company, and his night shift stocking shelves at the 24-hour grocery store. 3 jobs, 3 years of this routine, all to pay for Emma's treatments, the experimental drug trials that the insurance company had denied, the specialists who demanded payment up front. The envelope in his jacket pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He'd received it yesterday, hand-delivered by a man in a suit so expensive it probably cost more than Daniel's car. Mr. Morrison, we've been searching for you for 3 months. Your uncle, Theodore Morrison, passed away. You're the sole beneficiary of his estate. The lawyer had said the words so casually, as if he were discussing the weather. $50 billion. An empire built on tech patents and real estate holdings across 40 countries. And Uncle Daniel barely remembered who'd had a falling out with Daniel's father decades ago and disappeared from their lives completely. Daniel hadn't told Jessica yet. He'd wanted to wait until he could process it himself, until he could figure out what this meant for Emma's treatments, for their future. He'd planned to tell her this morning, over coffee, maybe let himself imagine the relief on her face when she realized their daughter would get the best care in the world. But when he arrived home at 7:15, the front door was already open. Jessica stood in the living room, wearing a red dress Daniel had never seen before, her makeup perfect, her hair styled in a way that must have taken hours. Behind her stood Richard Blackwood, Daniel's boss at the warehouse, the man who'd cut Daniel's hours last month, who'd written him up for being 2 minutes late when Emma had a seizure and Daniel had to call an ambulance. Richard wore a smirk that made Daniel's stomach turn. Danny. Jessica's voice was cold, controlled. She never called him Danny anymore. That name belonged to a different version of their marriage. Before Emma got sick, before the medical bills piled up, before Jessica started working as Richard's personal assistant and coming home later and later each night. Jess, I need to talk to you. Something happened. Something important. I'm leaving you. She said it like she was ordering coffee. No emotion, no hesitation. I'm leaving you for Richard. We're getting married next month. Daniel felt Emma stir in the wheelchair behind him. She couldn't hear this. Not like this. Jessica, please, let's talk about this inside. Emma. Jessica's face twisted with something that looked like disgust. I'm tired of watching her die, Danny. I'm tired of this house, this life, you. Look at yourself. You're pathetic. You've gained 40 pounds from eating gas station food between your shifts. You smell like sweat and failure. Richard treats me like a queen. He has money, power, everything you'll never be able to give me. Richard stepped forward, putting his arm around Jessica's waist with a possessiveness that made Daniel's fist clench. She deserves better than you, Morrison. She always has. I'm taking care of her now. You and your sick kid need to find somewhere else to live. This house is in both your names, but Jessica and I have already contacted a lawyer. We'll buy you out for pennies, or you can fight it and waste money you don't have on legal fees. Daniel's voice came out steady, calmer than he felt. Emma needs her room. Her medications are here. Her oxygen machine. Not my problem anymore. Jessica walked to the door, opened it wide. Rain poured down outside. The morning sky dark with storm clouds. I packed bags for both of you. They're on the porch. Get out. Behind Daniel, Emma coughed. It was the wet, rattling cough that meant fluid in her lungs, the sound that sent panic through Daniel's chest every time. He turned to see blood on her lips, bright red against her pale skin. Daddy? Her voice was so small, so scared. What's happening? Jessica's face didn't change. She stared at her daughter, at the blood, and Daniel saw nothing in her eyes. No love, no regret, nothing. Your mother needs us to leave for a little while, sweetheart. Daniel kept his voice soft, gentle, the way he always did with Emma. It's okay, we'll figure it out. Richard laughed. It was a sound without humor, cruel and sharp. Figure it out? Morrison, you can barely afford one apartment, let alone medical care for a dying kid. Face it, you're finished. He walked across the living room until he was inches from Daniel's face. You're nothing. You've always been nothing. Jessica finally realized it. Then Richard spat. The saliva hit Daniel's cheek, warm and degrading, and Jessica laughed. She actually laughed, a sound that Daniel would hear in his nightmares for years afterward. Daniel didn't move, didn't wipe his face. He looked at Jessica, really looked at her, trying to find any trace of the woman he'd married 12 years ago. The woman who'd cried tears of joy when Emma was born, who'd promised to love him in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer. She was gone. Maybe she'd been gone for years, and he'd been too exhausted to notice. Okay, Daniel said quietly. He reached into his pocket, felt the envelope there. The lawyer's card was inside, along with documents that would change everything. But he didn't pull it out. Something stopped him. Some instinct that said this wasn't the moment. He turned Emma's wheelchair around, grabbed the bags from the porch, and walked into the rain. Behind him, he heard the door slam shut. Emma looked up at him as they stood on the sidewalk, rain soaking through their clothes. Daddy, where are we going? Daniel knelt beside her wheelchair, wiped the blood from her lips with his sleeve, and pulled the envelope from his pocket. The rain smeared the ink on the lawyer's card, but the phone number was still legible. We're going somewhere better, baby. He pulled out his phone, dialed the number. Somewhere much, much better. The lawyer answered on the second ring. Mr. Morrison, have you made your decision regarding the estate? Daniel looked back at the house, at the closed door, at the lights glowing warm inside while he and his daughter stood in the cold rain. Yes, I want everything transferred immediately, and I need the best pediatric oncologist in the country. Money is no object. Whatever Emma needs. Of course, sir, I'll have a car sent to your location within 10 minutes. Where should I tell them you'll be staying? The presidential suite at the Grandview Hotel, and have them prepare a second suite for Emma's medical team. We'll need around-the-clock care. Behind him, through the window, Daniel could see Jessica and Richard kissing, celebrating. They had no idea what they'd just lost. They had no idea what he'd become. Emma squeezed his hand. Daddy, you sound different. Daniel smiled at his daughter, really smiled for the first time in years. Everything's different now, Emma. Everything. The divorce papers arrived 3 days later, delivered by a process server to the presidential suite where Daniel and Emma had been living. Emma's new medical team, 3 specialists, 2 nurses, and a live-in care coordinator, had transformed the second suite into a state-of-the-art medical facility. Emma's color had already improved. The experimental treatment protocol funded by Daniel's newly accessible fortune, working faster than anyone had dared hope. Daniel read through the papers while Emma slept in the next room, her breathing steady for the first time in months. Jessica wanted the house, half of their joint savings account, all $7,000 of it, and full custody of Emma, with Daniel paying child support. The audacity of it would have been funny if it weren't so cruel. She was abandoning a dying child and still trying to extract money from the situation. His lawyer, Margaret Chen, sat across from him in the suite's living room, her expression professional but sympathetic. Mr. Morrison, you don't have to sign anything she's demanding. With your current financial situation, you have every advantage. We can fight for full custody. Make sure Emma stays with you permanently." "Do it!" Daniel's voice was flat. "Full custody. And I'm not giving her a penny of the joint account. In fact, I want to know the moment she tries to access it." Margaret nodded, making notes on her tablet. "There's something else you should know. Richard Blackwood, your former employer, is in significant financial trouble. His warehouse operation is failing. He's been embezzling from the company to maintain his lifestyle, and there are criminal investigations underway. Your former wife chose to leave you for a man who's about to lose everything." Daniel felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just a hollow emptiness where his feelings for Jessica used to be. "Let it play out," he said. "I don't need revenge. I just need Emma to get better." But 2 weeks later, the wedding invitation arrived. It was expensive, embossed, the kind of invitation that cost $50 per card. "Jessica Morrison and Richard Blackwood request the honor of your presence at their wedding ceremony." Daniel stared at it for a long time, trying to understand the mindset of a woman who would invite her ex-husband, the man she kicked out, the father of her sick child, to watch her marry his former boss. Emma had seen the invitation before Daniel could hide it. She was in remission now, the color back in her cheeks, her energy returning. "Is that from Mommy?" Daniel nodded, unable to speak. "She invited you to her wedding?" Emma's voice was small, confused. "Why would she do that?" "I don't know, sweetheart." "Are you going to go?" Daniel looked at his daughter, at the life returning to her eyes, and made a decision. Yes, I am." Margaret tried to talk him out of it. "Mr. Morrison, this is clearly a power play. She wants to humiliate you, to show everyone that she's moved on to someone better. There's no reason to subject yourself to that. There's every reason." Daniel stood at the window of his suite, looking out over the city. "She needs to see what she gave up. They both do. Not for revenge, Margaret. For closure. For Emma. That little girl deserves to know that her father isn't the worthless man her mother claimed he was." The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Daniel didn't just prepare to attend the wedding. He prepared to make an entrance that would change everything. He hired a personal trainer, a nutritionist, a stylist. The weight he'd gained from stress and exhaustion began to melt away. He bought a suit that cost more than he used to make in a year. He had his lawyer draft documents that would be delivered at precisely the right moment. And he made phone calls. So many phone calls. The warehouse where Richard had been embezzling? Daniel bought it, saved all the jobs of the workers Richard would have destroyed, including the jobs of people who'd witnessed Daniel's humiliation. The company investigating Richard for fraud? Daniel ensured they had every piece of evidence they needed, delivered anonymously. The bank that held the mortgage on Jessica and Richard's new house, the house they'd moved into together, the one Jessica had posted all over social media. Daniel bought the note, called the loan due. He wasn't being cruel, he was being methodical. Emma's doctor cleared her to attend the wedding, and Daniel knew what he had to do. His daughter needed to see her mother one more time, needed to understand that Jessica's choices had nothing to do with Emma's worth. It would be painful, but it would be healing too. The morning of the wedding, Daniel dressed in his suite while Emma watched, her eyes wide. "Daddy, you look different." He did look different. 50 pounds lighter, his face lean and strong, wearing a suit that had been custom-tailored to perfection. But the biggest change wasn't physical. It was the way he carried himself now, the confidence that came from knowing he could protect his daughter, provide for her, give her anything she needed. "Do I look okay?" he asked Emma, kneeling down to her level. She touched his face, her small hand gentle. "You look like a prince, Daddy. Like someone from the stories you read me." "Then let's go to this ball, Princess, and let's show them what they lost." The wedding was at the Riverside Country Club, an exclusive venue that must have cost Richard everything he had left. Probably more than he had left, Daniel thought, as their car, a Bentley, because why not, pulled up to the valet stand. He'd arrived exactly on time. Not early, not late. He wanted Jessica and Richard settled, comfortable, surrounded by their guests when he walked in. Emma held his hand as they entered, her dress a soft pink that made her look like the princess he'd called her. She was nervous, he could tell, but she was also curious. She hadn't seen her mother in 2 months, hadn't spoken to her except for one phone call where Jessica had made excuses about being too busy with wedding planning to visit. The ceremony was outdoors, under a white tent with flowers everywhere. Expensive flowers that Daniel recognized because he'd researched the florist. Jessica had spared no expense, which was interesting considering Richard's financial situation. Daniel wondered how many credit cards they'd maxed out for this display. Heads turned as they walked down the aisle toward the seats. Daniel had planned it perfectly. They arrived just as the ceremony was beginning, impossible to miss. He heard the gasps, the whispers, saw the shock on faces that recognized him. But he wasn't looking at them. He was looking at the front, where Jessica stood next to Richard at the altar, both of them turning at the commotion. Jessica's face went white. Actually white, all the color draining out of it like someone had pulled a plug. She stared at Daniel with an expression that cycled rapidly through disbelief, confusion, and something that might have been fear. Because the man walking toward her wasn't the overweight, exhausted, defeated husband she'd kicked out 2 months ago. This man was transformed, powerful, radiating the kind of confidence that came from unlimited resources and absolute certainty. And beside him was Emma, alive, healthy, glowing with the kind of vitality that shouldn't be possible for a child who'd been dying. Richard's face turned red, then purple. "What the hell are you doing here, Morrison?" Daniel smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "You invited me, Richard. Remember? The invitation specifically requested my presence. I thought it would be rude not to attend." He led Emma to a seat in the front row, right where the bride's family should sit, and sat down himself, crossing his legs casually. The officiant looked confused, unsure whether to continue. Jessica stood frozen at the altar, her bouquet shaking in her hands. Daniel could see her trying to process what she was seeing, trying to reconcile the man in front of her with the man she'd thrown away. "How?" Jessica's voice cracked. "How is Emma?" "Healthy," Daniel finished for her. "Oh, that's an interesting story. You see, something happened the day you kicked us out. Something you didn't know about. Something that changed everything." Richard stepped forward, trying to assert dominance, but Daniel noticed the way his suit hung on him, slightly too large, like he'd lost weight from stress. "Get out, Morrison. You're not wanted here." "I think you'll want to hear this, Richard. Both of you will." Daniel stood, and somehow the entire wedding party, all 200 guests, went silent. 2 months ago, I inherited $50 billion from an uncle I barely knew. $50 billion. I became one of the wealthiest men in the country overnight. And you, Jessica, you kicked me out that same morning. You had no idea that the poor husband you'd mocked and degraded had just become wealthier than you could ever imagine. The silence was absolute. Daniel could hear birds chirping in the trees outside the tent. Jessica's bouquet fell from her hands, hitting the ground with a soft thud. No, that's not. It's true." Daniel pulled out his phone, pulled up a news article. "Want to see? Mystery heir claims tech fortune." There's my picture. Front page of the Financial Times last month. I had my lawyers keep it quiet as long as possible, but the story broke last week. I'm surprised you didn't see it, but then again, you've been busy planning this wedding. He walked closer to the altar, close enough that he could see the devastation forming in Jessica's eyes, the understanding of what she'd done. "I used that money to save Emma's life. The best doctors, the best treatments, experimental protocols that insurance companies wouldn't touch. She's in full remission now. Did you know that?" "No, of course you didn't. You haven't called to check on her once." Emma stood up from her seat, walked to Daniel's side. She looked at her mother with an expression far too old for a 7-year-old. "Why didn't you love me, Mommy? Why didn't you want to save me?" Jessica made a sound like a wounded animal. "Emma, I don't." Daniel's voice cut through the tent like a blade. "Don't try to explain it to her. There's no explanation that makes it okay. You chose money and status over your dying daughter. You laughed while your lover spat in my face. You stole our joint account, all $7,000 of it, and used it to help pay for this wedding. And then you had the audacity to invite me here to humiliate me one more time." He looked at Richard, who'd gone from purple to an ashen gray. "But here's the thing, Richard. While you were celebrating stealing my wife, I was making some changes. I bought your warehouse. saved all those jobs you were going to destroy. I also made sure that the fraud investigation into your embezzlement got every piece of evidence they needed. The police are actually waiting outside right now. They wanted to arrest you this morning, but I asked them to wait until after the ceremony. I thought you deserved to have this moment, this public moment, before your life ends. You're lying, Richard whispered, but his voice betrayed him. He knew it was true. I also bought the mortgage on your house, Jessica, the one you've been posting all over Instagram, showing off to your friends. Loans due in 30 days. Full payment. Given that Richard's about to spend the next decade in prison for fraud, I'm guessing you won't be able to make that payment. Jessica was crying now, mascara running down her face, her perfect wedding makeup destroyed. Danny, please. My name is Daniel. His voice was ice. And I didn't come here for revenge, Jessica. I came here to show Emma something important. I came here to show her that her mother's choices had nothing to do with her worth and everything to do with her mother's character. I came here to show her that the man you called worthless, pathetic, a failure, that man loved his daughter enough to save her life while you were planning flower arrangements. He took Emma's hand, turned to leave, then stopped. Oh, one more thing. The joint account, I didn't touch it. All $7,000 is still there. Every penny. I don't need your money, Jessica. I never needed anything from you except loyalty and love, and you couldn't give me either. He pulled an envelope from his jacket, handed it to the officiant. These are the final custody papers. Full custody to me. Child support set at $1 per year because I'm not cruel enough to make you pay more. You're free, Jessica. Free to marry Richard, free to live your life, free from the burden of being a mother. He walked out of the tent with Emma beside him, and behind them, he heard Jessica collapse, heard Richard start shouting, heard the police moving in, but he didn't look back. He'd meant what he said. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, about showing his daughter that love and loyalty mattered more than money, even though, ironically, he now had more money than most people could imagine. Emma was quiet until they reached the car. Then she looked up at him, her eyes bright with tears, and asked, "Did Mommy ever love us?" Daniel knelt down, held his daughter close. "I think she loved us the best way she knew how. But some people, they get lost. They forget what matters. That's not your fault, Emma. That's never your fault. I love you, Daddy. You saved my life. You saved mine first, Princess. You saved mine first." As they drove away from the country club, Daniel's phone buzzed with a message from Margaret. "The papers are filed. Full custody is yours. Richard has been arrested. Jessica signed everything. I think she was in shock. It's done, Mr. Morrison. It's all done." Daniel looked at Emma in the rearview mirror, singing softly to herself, color in her cheeks, life in her eyes, and realized something profound. He hadn't just inherited $50 billion. He'd inherited a second chance, a chance to be the father Emma deserved, to build a life based on love instead of desperation, to show his daughter what really mattered in this world. The revenge, if you could call it that, wasn't about crushing Jessica and Richard. It was about rising so far above them that they became irrelevant, about building something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal, about proving that kindness and love were stronger than cruelty and greed. 3 months later, Daniel stood in the office of Morrison Medical Research Foundation, the charitable organization he'd founded with $1 billion of his inheritance. The foundation funded pediatric cancer research, provided free treatments for families who couldn't afford them, and employed the best doctors in the world. Emma's face smiled at him from a photo on his desk, taken last week at her 8th birthday party, surrounded by friends and laughter and life. His phone rang. It was an unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. "Daniel?" Jessica's voice was small, broken. "I'm calling from a paycheck. Richard's in prison. The house was foreclosed. I lost everything. I have nowhere to go." Daniel was silent for a long moment, thinking about everything that had happened, everything she'd done. Then he thought about Emma, about the kind of man he wanted to be for his daughter. "There's a shelter on 5th Street, he said quietly. They help women get back on their feet, find jobs, rebuild their lives. I donated money to expand their services last month. Go there. Tell them Daniel Morrison sent you. They'll help you." "That's it?" Jessica's voice rose. "After everything we had, after 12 years of marriage, you're sending me to a homeless shelter?" "No, Jessica. I'm sending you to a place that will give you the help you need to become someone better. What you do with that chance is up to you." He paused. "Emma asks about you sometimes. If you get yourself together, if you do the work, maybe someday you can see her again. But that's not my decision. When she's old enough, it'll be hers." He hung up before she could respond. That night, he read Emma a bedtime story, tucked her in, and watched her fall asleep with a peace on her face that had been absent for so long. And Daniel understood something he'd never fully grasped before. The real victory wasn't in Jessica's downfall or Richard's arrest. The real victory was here, in this quiet room, watching his daughter breathe easily, knowing she had a future full of possibilities, knowing he'd chosen love over bitterness, mercy over revenge. He'd inherited $50 billion, yes, but the real inheritance was this: the chance to be a better man than the one Jessica had betrayed, the strength to forgive without forgetting, the wisdom to know that the best revenge was building a life so beautiful that those who'd hurt him became nothing more than a cautionary tale he'd tell Emma someday about the cost of cruelty and the power of love. 5 years later, Daniel Morrison stood at the back of the auditorium at Riverside Preparatory Academy, watching his daughter Emma accept the Middle School Science Award for her research project on leukemia treatment innovations. She was 13 now, tall and confident, her hair long and healthy, no trace of the pale, dying child she'd once been. She spoke into the microphone with a clarity that made his chest tight with pride. "I started this project because I wanted to understand the treatment that saved my life," Emma said to the audience of parents, teachers, and students. 5 years ago, I was dying. The doctors gave me months to live, but my dad never gave up. He found a way to get me into an experimental treatment program, and now I'm here. I'm alive. And I want to spend my life making sure other kids get the same chance I got." The auditorium erupted in applause. Daniel wiped his eyes, not caring who saw. Margaret Chen, who'd become not just his lawyer, but a close friend, stood beside him with her own children. "She's remarkable, Daniel, just like her father." "She's better than me," Daniel said softly. "She's what I'm fighting for." The Morrison Medical Research Foundation had grown exponentially in 5 years. What had started as a $1 billion charitable organization now operated in 40 countries, funding research, providing free treatments, and employing over 3,000 medical professionals. They'd helped save the lives of more than 10,000 children with cancer. Emma's face, older now but still recognizable, appeared in their promotional materials with her permission, a symbol of hope for families facing the same nightmare Daniel had lived through. But the foundation was just part of Daniel's empire. He'd taken his inheritance and multiplied it, not out of greed, but out of a desire to create lasting change. Morrison Technologies had acquired failing companies and turned them around, saving jobs. Morrison Housing had built affordable housing complexes in 12 cities. The Morrison Scholarship Fund sent 500 underprivileged kids to college every year. He'd become the kind of wealthy man who used his power to lift others up, not tear them down. And Emma had watched every step of that journey, learning from him what it meant to have resources and responsibility. After the ceremony, Emma ran to him, her award in hand, and hugged him tight. "Did you see, Dad? I won. I saw, Princess. I'm so proud of you." "There's someone here," Emma said, her voice suddenly uncertain. "Someone who wants to talk to you, to both of us." Daniel followed Emma's gaze to the corner of the auditorium, where a woman stood alone, looking both hopeful and terrified. It took him a moment to recognize her. Jessica. She looked different. Older, yes, but also humbler. Her clothes were simple but clean, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. No makeup, no designer labels. Nothing of the woman who'd laughed while Richard spat in his face. "She's been coming to my school events for the past year," Emma said quietly, "just watching from the back. She never tried to talk to me, but today she asked if she could say hello." Daniel felt his protective instincts flare. "Do you want to talk to her?" Emma thought about it, her face serious. "I think so. I think I need to. They walked over together. Jessica's eyes filled with tears when she saw them up close. Emma, you're so beautiful, so healthy. Hi, Mom. Emma's voice was cautious, careful. I don't expect forgiveness, Jessica said quickly, looking at Daniel. I don't deserve it. I just wanted to see her, to tell her how sorry I am. I've been working at the shelter you told me about. I'm a counselor there now, helping other women who made the same mistakes I did. It doesn't fix what I did, but it's something. Daniel studied her face, looking for manipulation, for angles. He found none, just regret, genuine and deep. You've been watching Emma's events for a year? I didn't want to disrupt her life. I just needed to see that she was okay, that she was happy. When I saw her get up on that stage today, Jessica's voice broke. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry to both of you. I was lost. I was cruel. I was everything a mother shouldn't be. I don't expect you to let me back into your lives. I just needed you to know that I see it now. I see what I gave up, what I destroyed. Emma looked at her mother for a long moment, then at her father. Daniel nodded, leaving the decision to her. I don't forgive you yet, Emma said, her voice steady. What you did really hurt me. For a long time, I thought it was my fault, that I was too sick, too expensive, too much trouble. But Dad showed me that wasn't true. He showed me what real love looks like. Jessica nodded, tears streaming down her face. He always did love better than me. But, Emma continued, maybe we could talk sometimes. Not a lot, just sometimes. I'd like to understand why you did what you did, and maybe you need to understand who I became after you left. I'd like that, Jessica whispered. Thank you, Emma. Thank you. As they left the auditorium, Emma between them, but closer to Daniel, he realized that this was the true ending of the story that had begun 5 years ago. Not revenge, not triumph over enemies, but the harder work of healing, of mercy, of becoming people worthy of the second chances life sometimes offered. That night, after Emma was asleep, Daniel stood on the balcony of their penthouse. They'd moved to a real home after a year in the hotel, a beautiful house with a yard where Emma could play, and looked out over the city. His phone buzzed with a message from the foundation. Another child had entered remission. Another family had been saved from the nightmare he'd lived through. He thought about Richard, who'd served 3 years in prison and was now working at a car wash, broken and irrelevant. He thought about Jessica, rebuilding her life one counseling session at a time, trying to become someone worthy of her daughter's limited forgiveness. He thought about the man he'd been 5 years ago, exhausted and desperate, not knowing that salvation was already in his pocket. And he thought about Emma, asleep in her room, healthy and whole, and full of dreams about the future. She wanted to be a doctor, wanted to save other children the way she'd been saved. She had his determination, his compassion, but none of his bitterness. She was proof that love could triumph over abandonment, that wealth meant nothing if it wasn't used to heal the world's wounds, that the greatest inheritance he could give her wasn't money but character. Daniel Morrison had inherited $50 billion, yes, but the real fortune was the life he'd built from ashes, the daughter he'd saved, the thousands of children who'd lived because of choices he'd made, the man he'd become when the woman he loved had kicked him to the curb. In the end, Jessica had been right about one thing. He was different than the man she'd married. He was better, and that was the greatest revenge of all.